A stranger zoomed into Google Street View and found a missing car from 2005. The hiss of the cicadas was the sound of a secret burning. It was July in suburban Ohio, the air thick and syrupy, the kind of heat that made asphalt soft and tempers short. For 15-year-old Leo, it was the sound of summer vacationer, monotonous, buzzing eternity stretching out before him. He was supposed to be cleaning the garage, a task his dad had assigned with a sigh that morning, but the garage was a tomb of forgotten hobbies and dead spiders. Instead, Leo was in his dimly lit bedroom, blinds drawn against the oppressive sun, a digital ghost haunting the streets of the world. He was a cartographic archaeologist, a connoisseur of the mundane. Google Street View was his time machine, his escape pod. He'd spent weeks walking the sun-bleached alleys of Naples, the neon-drenched corridors of Tokyo, the desolate, wind-swept roads of the Patagonian desert. But today, he was exploring his own past. He'd typed in the address of his childhood home, a small blue house on a street called Chestnut Lane, and clicked back through time. 2022, 2019, 2015. The images degraded, the colors washing out, the world becoming a hazier, less certain version of itself. He kept clicking, a strange nostalgia pulling him deeper. 2011, 2008. Finally, he hit the oldest layer of data. 2005. The world sharpened into a grainy, pixelated memory. The trees on Chestnut Lane were smaller, his neighbor's fence was still unpainted, and there, parked on the curb in front of the house next door, was the ghost. It was a 1999 Honda Accord, a deep, metallic green, the color of a forest at dusk. A small silver dreamcatcher hung from the rearview mirror. Leo felt a jolt, a cold prickle that had nothing to do with the air conditioning humming in his window. He knew that car. Everyone on the street knew that Cardodit had belonged to Sarah Jenkins, the quiet woman who lived next door. She was a music teacher, her living room filled with violins and cellos in various states of repair. Sometimes, in the evenings, the sad, sweet sound of a lone instrument would drift through Leo's open window. Sarah had vanished in the fall of 2005. One day she was there. Her green Honda parked in its usual spot, and the next, she wasn't. The police had come, asked questions, taped off her house. They said she'd packed a bag and left, maybe to start a new life. But her car, they'd said, was gone too. They'd issued an Amber Alert for the vehicle, a detail that had always seemed strange to Leo, even as a small child. You issue Amber Alerts for kids, not cars. But the police report, which he'd looked up years later during a morbid phase of internet sleuthing, was clear. Sarah Jenkins, female, 34, last seen leaving her residence. Vehicle, a 1999 green Honda Accord, also missing. But it wasn't missing, it was right here. Parked on the curb, plain as day. In a photograph taken by a Google mapping car on a Tuesday afternoon in August 2005. Weeks after she had supposedly driven away in it. Leo's breath hitched. His fingers, slick with sweat, hovered over the mouse. He zoomed in. The resolution was poor, a smear of digital artifacts, but the details were unmistakable. The dent on the rear passenger side door from where a shopping cart had slammed into it at the local Kroger. The faded university decal on the back window. The Dreamcatcher. It was her car. It had been sitting right there. He felt a sudden dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped away. The police had been so certain. The narrative was set in stone. She left. She drove away. The car was the proof. But the proof was a lie. The car had never left. So where had it gone? And more importantly, where was Sarah? His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just a glitch in the matrix, a forgotten digital relic. This was an error in the official story, a crack in the foundation of a 17-year-old mystery. The cicadas outside his window seemed to buzz louder, their drone taking on a frantic, urgent quality. He zoomed in again, so close that the image dissolved into a meaningless mosaic of colored squares. He was staring at the driver's side window. The glass was dark, reflecting the summer sky. But there was a shape inside, a distortion in the reflection. It was just a blur, a smudge of pixels, But his mind, supercharged with adrenaline, began to fill in the blanks. Was it a shadow, a piece of clothing, a face? He frantically dragged the view down the street, his digital self lurching forward in clumsy, disorienting jumps. He needed to see more. He spun the camera around, his perspective whipping past mailboxes and manicured lawns. He was looking for, he didn't know what, another angle. A person in a window, something out of place, and then he saw it. Further down the block, parked 2 houses away from Sarah's, was another car, a dark blue sedan, nondescript and generic. But a man was standing beside it, leaning against the passenger door, his arms crossed. He was just a blur in the distance, his face an indecipherable smudge. He was looking directly at Sarah Jenkins's house. No, not at the house. He was looking at her car. The man's posture was casual, but there was an intensity to it, a stillness that felt predatory. He was watching. Leo's blood ran cold. The Google car, with its impartial, all-seeing eye, had captured not just one anomaly, but 2. The impossible car and the watching man. It was a silent, sun-drenched tableau of something awful. The official story was a lie. The car hadn't been driven away. It had been sitting there, a silent testament, while a man stood down the street, waiting. A new memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. Leo, 5 years old, playing with toy soldiers in his front yard. The man from the blue sedan was there, but not as a street view ghost. He was real. He had been a recurring figure that summer, always in the background. Sometimes he'd be walking a dogged dog no one else on the street had ever seen. Sometimes he'd be jogging, his face perpetually hidden by a baseball cap and sunglasses, even on cloudy days. He was one of those neighborhood fixtures you see but don't register, a piece of human scenery. But now, seeing him frozen in this digital amber, his focus so clearly fixed on Sarah's car, his presence felt sinister, a harbinger. He had been the new neighbor. Mr. Henderson, a quiet, single man who had moved in a few months before Sarah disappeared. He was a police officer. The realization hit Leo with the force of a physical blow. He shoved his chair back from the desk, a choked gasp escaping his lips. Mr. Henderson. Officer Henderson. The friendly neighborhood cop who had been one of the first responders on the scene when Sarah was reported missing. The man who had personally spoken to the neighbors, his voice calm and reassuring, explaining that she had likely just needed to get away. The man who had helped write the report that stated her car was missing. Leo's mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. Henderson had been watching the car. The car that was supposed to be gone. The car that was the central pillar of the official story. He had lied. A police officer had deliberately, knowingly, lied in a missing persons report. Why? The answer was a dark, suffocating wave that rose up from the pit of his stomach. You lie about a missing car when the car isn't missing. You lie about a missing car when the car can't be found. You lie when the car is evidence. You lie when the car contains something you don't want anyone to see. The blurry shape in the driver's seat. The smudge of pixels. Leo's imagination, a feverish, terrified artist, painted a portrait in the void. It wasn't a shadow. It was the outline of a slumped figure. It was Sarah. Oh God. The buzzing of the cicadas was no longer just a sound. It was the screaming of 1,000 tiny witnesses. The heat in the room became unbearable, suffocating. He felt a primal urge to run, to scream, to tell someone. But who? His parents. They'd think he was crazy, just a kid with an overactive imagination who'd spent too much time online. The police had choked back a laugh that sounded more like a sob. The police. He had just discovered that the police were part of the nightmare. He was looking at a 17-year-old photograph that implicated a cop in the disappearance note. The murder of his childhood neighbor. He felt a terrifying sense of isolation. He was the only one who knew. This digital ghost, this forgotten snapshot of a summer afternoon, had made him a witness to a crime that had been buried for nearly 2 decades. The secret wasn't burning anymore. It had just exploded in his face. He clicked back to the image of Henderson, his finger trembling. He zoomed in, desperately trying to pierce the veil of pixels, to see the man's face, to find some confirmation. Some detail that would either prove or disprove the monstrous theory taking shape in his mind. But the image remained stubbornly low resolution, a frustrating digital fog. Henderson was a ghost, a phantom of data. Yet his presence was a venom that was seeping back through time, poisoning the past. Leo thought about the days after Sarah vanished. The yellow tape, the somber-faced officers. He remembered Henderson, his uniform crisp, his expression a mask of professional concern, talking to Leo's mum on their porch. He had put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort. "We're doing everything we can," he had said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "People need a fresh start sometimes. I'm sure she's fine." The memory was now grotesque, obscene. The hand on his mother's shoulder was not a gesture of comfort. It was a performance. A calculated act of deception by a predator hiding in plain sight. A sudden sharp noise from downstairs made him jump. It was just the slam of the front door. His dad was home from work. "Leo, did you clean out that garage?" The voice boomed. Laced with its usual weary frustration, Leo couldn't answer. His throat was tight, his world tilted on its axis. The mundane reality of his life, the garage, his dad's chores, the suffocating boredom of summer collided with a digital horror. On his screen. How could he explain? "Dad, I think our old neighbor, the cop, murdered the music teacher, and I found the proof on Google Maps." It sounded insane. He was just a boy in his room, staring at a picture. But the picture was real. The car was real. The lie was real. He had to save it. He had to have proof. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his mind racing. Screenshot, save as. He created a new folder, naming it with a single trembling word: evidence. He saved the image of the car, then the image of Henderson, then a wide shot of the whole street. He saved multiple versions, his paranoia flaring. He uploaded them to a cloud drive, then to a burner email account he created on the spot. He was covering his tracks, a spy in a war he had just discovered he was fighting. He felt a chill as a new thought crept in. The Google car had driven down that street, its camera swiveling, recording everything. It had recorded the green Honda. It had recorded Henderson. What else had it recorded? Henderson was looking at the car. Had he seen the Google car approaching? The cars were distinctive, with their strange, multi-lensed periscopes mounted on the roof. They were an anomaly. A witness would notice an anomaly. If Henderson had seen it, would he have understood what it was? Back in 2005, Google Street View was a new, almost experimental technology. Most people wouldn't have known its purpose, but a cop might be more aware of surveillance technology. A cop might have seen a car bristling with cameras and understood that the entire street was being documented. And if he knew he was being filmed while watching the car he claimed was missing, what would he do? Leo's eyes darted back to the screen. He began to move the view again, but not down the street this time. He moved it forward in time, following the logical path of the Google car. He clicked, and the world lurched. He was now a few feet past Henderson's position. He clicked again. The blue sedan was closer. He could almost make out the license plate. He held his breath and clicked one more time. The image that loaded made him cry out, a raw, involuntary sound of pure terror. The view was no longer of the street. It was tilted, chaotic. A blur of blue and chrome filled the frame, the hood of Henderson's sedan. The camera was pointing downward, as if it had been struck, knocked off its axis. And in the corner of the frame, a fractured, distorted close-up, was a face. It was Henderson's face. No longer a blurry smudge, but a clear high-resolution image captured in the split second of impact. His features were twisted in a snarl of rage and panic. His eyes, wide and furious, were staring directly into the lens. He had seen the camera. He had understood, and he had acted. The next image in the sequence was black. The camera was dead. The Google car hadn't just documented a crime scene, it had become part of it. Henderson hadn't just watched. He had attacked the witness. A witness made of metal and glass and circuitry. but a witness nonetheless. A witness that had held his secret, dormant and waiting. For 17 years, Leo stared at the black screen, his own reflection, a pale, terrified ghost in the monitor. The cicadas outside had fallen silent. The only sound was the frantic, desperate pounding of his own heart. He wasn't just a boy who had stumbled upon a clue. He had found the confession. He had seen the murderer's face at the moment he tried to silence the only thing that saw him. And now, 17 years later, he was the only one who knew. The secret was his now, and it felt like a death sentence. The ghost of Sarah Jenkins had haunted Chestnut Lane for 17 years. But she was a gentle spirit, a half-forgotten tragedy whispered about at neighborhood barbecues. The real ghost, the one that stalked the halls of Leo's mind, was far more malevolent. It was the face of Officer David Henderson, his features contorted in that final violent frame from the Google car's dying lens. It was a face of pure, unadulterated rage, the face of a man caught in a lie so profound it had swallowed a woman's life. To understand the lie, Leo had to understand the people it consumed. He started with Sarah. She wasn't just the music teacher or the missing woman. He needed to know her. He fell down a rabbit hole of old local news articles, high school yearbooks digitized by the local library, and the sparse fossilized remnants of her pre-social media digital footprint. Sarah Jenkins was a vessel of quiet, unfulfilled dreams. He found her high school yearbook photo from 1989. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes, even then, held a deep, melancholic wisdom. Her quote, beneath a picture of a girl with feathered bangs and an oversized sweater, was from a poem. I am a part of all that I have met. She was on the orchestra committee, the debate club, the literary magazine. She was smart, artistic, and by all accounts, intensely private. He found a review of a local symphony performance. From 2002, in the Westerville Chronicle, the critic praised the hauntingly beautiful cello solo performed by local instructor Sarah Jenkins. He imagined her on that stage, the warm wood of the cello cradled against her, her eyes closed, lost in the music. It was the only way he could picture her happy. He pieced together her life, a music degree from Ohio State, a small inheritance from her grandmother that allowed her to buy the little blue house on Chestnut Lane, a quiet existence built around giving lessons to children who mostly didn't practice, and repairing instruments that held the echoes of other people's melodies. Her life was one of hushed passion. A neighbor, quoted in one of the initial articles about her disappearance, described her as sweet, but distant. Like she was always listening to a song only she could hear. Leo felt a profound ache for her. She wasn't a headline. She was a person who loved the mournful voice of the cello, who kept to herself, who had the bad luck to live next to a monster. Her wound was a quiet one, a life lived in the margins, a soul that yearned for harmony in a world that was often brutally dissonant. Her secret, he suspected, was loneliness. The profound, aching loneliness of a person who feels everything but connects with few. Then there was the antagonist, David Henderson. Leo became obsessed with him, a digital stalker driven by a terrifying sense of justice. Henderson was still a cop. Not just a cop, a detective. Promoted twice since 2005. He'd even received a commendation for his work on a high-profile robbery case a few years back. There was a photo of him in the paper, shaking the police chief's hand, a broad, confident smile on his face. It was the smile of a man who believed he was untouchable. Leo dug deeper, using online archives and public records searches. Henderson had no wife, no kids. He still lived in the same house, the one just 2 doors down from Sarah's old place. Leo's family had moved away a decade ago. But the thought that Henderson had remained a predator dwelling so close to his hunting ground sent a wave of nausea through him. Henderson's past was a carefully curated facade of civic duty. He coached Little League. He volunteered at the annual policeman's ball. He was, on the surface, a pillar of the community. But there were cracks. A search of court records under variations of his name turned up something from before he moved to Chestnut Lane. A restraining order filed in 2003 by an ex-girlfriend in a neighboring county. The details were sealed, the case dismissed when the woman, a nurse named Maria Flores, failed to appear at the final hearing. But the initial complaint was a public document. It spoke of unrelenting jealousy, constant surveillance, and a violent temper hidden behind a calm exterior. Maria Flores wrote that David had a terrifying ability to switch from charming to menacing in a heartbeat. He watches, she'd written in a shaky, desperate hand on the court filing. Even when you can't see him, you can feel him watching. The words resonated with the image frozen in Leo's mind. Henderson, standing by his car, his gaze fixed on Sarah's house. He wasn't just a cop, he was a stalker. His broken past wasn't one of grand tragedy, but of a creeping, insidious pathology. The uniform wasn't a symbol of protection. It was a cloak. It gave him access, it gave him authority, and it made him invisible. His secret was the rage that simmered beneath the polished veneer of the friendly neighborhood cop. He was a man who craved control, who saw women not as people, but as possessions. Sarah, with her quiet independence and her private world of music, must have been an intolerable provocation to a man like that. She was a prize he couldn't win, so he had decided to break her dot. And finally, there was the hidden witness. Himself. Leo felt like a character in a story he never wanted to be a part of. His own past was now cast in a new, sinister light. He remembered that summer of 2005, not as a hazy, idyllic childhood memory, but as the backdrop to a murder. He was the little boy with the toy soldiers. A 5-year-old playing war games while a real, silent war was being waged just a few yards away. His secret, the one that now kept him up at night, his heart pounding in the dark, was his silence. He had been there. He had seen Henderson, not just in the street view image, but in reality. He just hadn't understood. He remembered fragments, moments that were meaningless then, but were now screaming with significance. He remembered asking his mum why the policeman was always running past their house. "He's just exercising, sweetie," she'd said, ruffling his hair. He remembered a dead bird on Sarah's doorstep one morning, its neck bent at an unnatural angle. He'd thought a cat had gotten it. Now he saw it for what it likely was, a message, a threat. He remembered the music stopping. That was the most haunting memory of all. For weeks, the mournful sound of Sarah's cello had been the soundtrack to his summer evenings. Then, one day, it was just gone. The silence that followed was heavy, empty. It was the sound of a life being erased. The three of them, Sarah, the victim, Henderson, the antagonist, and Leo, the witness, were now bound together across time by a single, damning photograph. Sarah, the gentle soul whose music was silenced. Henderson, the predator hiding behind a badge. And Leo, the boy who held the key. The digital ghost who had stumbled into a graveyard and found the murderer's signature on a tombstone. He had to do something. The knowledge was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He couldn't go to the police. Henderson was the police. He couldn't tell his parents. They would try to protect him by burying the secret, by telling him to forget what he saw. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. He started a new document on his computer, a timeline. He meticulously plotted every detail he could find. The date of the Google Street View image, August 16, 2005. The date Sarah Jenkins was officially reported missing. September 4, 2005. The 19-day gap was a black hole, a chasm of terror. For 19 days, her car, her coffin, had sat on that street in plain sight, while her killer walked freely among his colleagues, feigning concern. Directing the investigation away from the truth, he thought about the restraining order again. Maria Flores, the woman who had tried to warn someone, anyone, about the darkness in David Henderson. What happened to her? Why did she drop the case? He did a new search, this time for her. He found a wedding announcement from 2006. She'd married, changed her name, and moved to Oregon. She had escaped. Or had she been scared into running? Leo felt a desperate, reckless urge to connect with her. She was the only other person who knew what Henderson was capable of. He found her on Facebook, her profile private, a single public photo of a smiling woman with her husband and 2 children. Standing in front of a backdrop of snow-capped mountains, she looked happy, she looked safe. He couldn't bring himself to intrude, to drag her back into the nightmare she had so clearly fought to leave behind. Contacting her would be an act of cruelty. But her words from that court document echoed in his head. He watches. The conflict inside him was a raging fire. Fear told him to delete the files, to forget what he'd seen, to retreat back into the anonymous safety of his digital wanderings. But his conscience, newly awakened and raw, screamed at him. For Sarah. For the quiet music teacher whose life had been stolen and whose memory had been desecrated by a lie. Her yearbook quote floated back to him. I am a part of all that I have. Met. Leo had met her now. Not in life, but in the echoes of her absence. He was a part of her story. And he couldn't let it end with a murderer's victory. He needed more than just the photos. The images were shocking, but a clever lawyer paid for by the police union could probably discredit them. A glitch, a doctored image, a coincidence. He needed something undeniable. Something that would connect Henderson, not just to the car, but to Sarah's disappearance itself. He went back to the old news articles, rereading them for the 10th time. One article quoted Henderson directly. The house was secure. Detective Henderson had told the Chronicle. No signs of forced entry. Her wallet and keys were gone. The most likely scenario is that she packed a bag, got in her car, and left voluntarily. We just want to make sure she's safe. Her keys were gone. The details slammed into Leo. The keys, if she had driven away, she would have taken her keys. But the car wasn't gone. So where were the keys? Maybe they were still in the ignition, in the car that sat on the street for 19 days. Or maybe Henderson had them. It was a tiny detail, a loose thread in the tapestry of his lies. But if he could pull on it, maybe the whole thing would unravel. He felt a new, terrifying resolve solidifying in his chest. He wasn't just a witness anymore, he was an investigator. He had to know what happened in those 19 days. He had to know how the car finally disappeared, and he had to find the keys. He closed his eyes and saw her face from the yearbook, her sad, knowing eyes. He felt like he was making a silent promise to her. He would find the truth. He would make the music start again. The first step was the hardest. It required him to leave the safety of his digital world and step into the physical one. It required Pangaea to get close to the monster. He had to go back to Chestnut Lane. He had to see the house. He had to see Henderson's house. He pulled up Google Maps, his hands shaking slightly, and typed in the address. He requested an Uber, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The injustice wasn't just a historical fact anymore, it was an active threat. Henderson was still out there, smiling for cameras, while Sarah's body lay, in all likelihood, in a forgotten grave. The injustice was escalating with every breath the detective took, and Leo was heading straight into its epicenter. The Uber ride to his old neighborhood felt like a descent. The familiar streets of his childhood were now overlaid with a grid of menace. Every dark sedan seemed to hold a watchful pair of eyes, every passing face a potential mask. When the car turned onto Chestnut Lane, Leo's stomach clenched. It looked smaller, more mundane than he remembered. The trees were overgrown, their branches casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement in the late afternoon sun. It was a street suffocating under the weight of a secret. He'd asked the driver to drop him at the corner, and he walked the rest of the way, his backpack feeling heavy and conspicuous. He passed his old house, a knot of bittersweet nostalgia tightening in his chest, but he didn't stop. His target was further down. He saw Sarah's old house first. It had been repainted, a bland, cheerful yellow. A swing set stood in the yard. A new family lived there now, oblivious to the tragedy that had soaked into the soil beneath their feet. Then he saw it. Henderson's house. It was just as he remembered, a neat, obsessively maintained brick ranch. The lawn edged with military precision, the windows dark and blank like a dead man's eyes. A large American flag hung limply from a pole by the front door. There was no car in the driveway. Leo's heart hammered. Was Henderson home? At work? The uncertainty was a torment. He ducked behind a large oak tree across the street, the rough bark digging into his back. He felt like a fool, a kid playing spy. What was he even doing here? What did he hope to find? He pulled out his phone, his hands slick with sweat, and pretended to be texting, his eyes darting towards the house. The place was silent, still. It radiated a coldness that had nothing to do with the shade. It was the coldness of a tomb. Days turned into a week of this agonizing, fruitless surveillance. Leo became a ghost on his old street. He'd take the bus, get off a few stops early, and walk, circling the block, always finding a new vantage point, a new shadow to hide in. He learned Henderson's routine. The detective left for work every morning at 7:30 a.m. in a city-issued black Ford Taurus and returned around 6 p.m. He never had visitors. The only person who ever came to the door was the mailman. The injustice of it all was a physical ache. Every morning, Leo watched Henderson walk out of his house, a respected officer of the law, and drive off to a job where he pretended to solve crimes, while he himself was the perpetrator of the most monstrous crime of all. The cruelty was in the normality of it. Henderson would get his mail, mow his lawn, take out his trash, a perfect citizen. While Sarah's existence had been utterly annihilated, Leo's frustration grew into a gnawing obsession. The digital evidence felt thin, fragile. He needed something more tangible. He started focusing on the house itself. The garage, specifically. It was attached to the house, its door always shut. If Henderson had needed to hide a 1999 Honda Accord for 19 days before he could dispose of it, the garage was the most logical place. It was a gaping question mark, a sealed box that might hold the answer. The betrayal he felt was sharp and multifaceted. It was a betrayal by the system that was supposed to protect people like Sarah, a system that had instead empowered her killer. It was a betrayal by his own childhood memories, which had been rendered toxic. And he felt a creeping sense of betrayal by his own fear, which held him paralyzed behind a tree while the killer lived his life undisturbed. He knew he had to get closer. The thought terrified him, but the alternative, doing nothing, was becoming unbearable. One evening, after Henderson had left for a rare night out, Leo had watched him leave in a polo shirt and slacks. Looking for all the world like he was headed to a casual dinner, Leo made his move. The sun had set, and the street was bathed in the hazy orange glow of the streetlights. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and the incessant buzz of cicadas. His heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. Every creak of a distant screen door, every bark of a dog, sent a jolt of pure panic through him. He slipped across the street, his sneakers silent on the asphalt, and crept up Henderson's driveway. He felt exposed, vulnerable, 1,000 unseen eyes watching him from the darkened windows of the neighboring houses. He reached the side of the garage and pressed himself against the cool brick. There was a single small window set high up. It was too high to see through. He ran his hand along the bottom of the main garage door, searching for any give, any weakness, but it was solid, sealed tight. He moved to the back of the house, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The backyard was as neat and sterile as the front. A small, perfect patio with a single grill, covered in a black vinyl shroud. No clutter. No life. His eyes fell on a basement window, a small rectangle of glass half hidden behind a thick azalea bush. It was an old-style window, the kind with a simple latch on the inside. He knelt down, the damp earth soaking through the knee of his jeans. He peered through the grimy glass. It was pitch black inside. He could see nothing. He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket, his hand trembling so badly he almost dropped it. He slid the thinnest blade between the window and the frame, fumbling, scraping against the wood. He was trying to jimmy the latch, a trick he'd seen in a movie. It felt absurd, impossible. He was going to get caught. A neighbor would see a flicker of movement, call the police, and Henderson's colleagues would arrive to find a teenage boy breaking into a detective's house. The irony was suffocating. After a few agonizing minutes of scraping, he heard a faint click. The latch had given way. The window swung inward with a low groan. For a moment, he just knelt there, frozen, listening. The only sound was the thumping of his own blood in his ears. He had done it. He had opened a door into the monster's lair, summoning every ounce of courage he possessed. He wriggled his way through the overgrown bush and lowered himself, feet first, through the narrow opening. He landed with a soft thud on a dusty concrete floor. He was in. The air in the basement was cold, stale, and smelled of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old rust and forgotten decay. He pulled his phone out, his thumb shaking as he turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a nervous, trembling path through the darkness. The basement was huge, unfinished. The stone walls were lined with shelves, neatly organized with boxes and tools. It was a portrait of meticulous, obsessive order. But Leo wasn't interested. In the shelves, his light swept across the floor, searching. He was looking for any sign, any remnant of Sarah. A piece of clothing, a drop of blood, anything. The concrete floor was clean. To clean, it looked like it had been scrubbed, maybe even bleached. In one corner, he saw a series of dark stains, but they were faint, almost invisible. They could have been anything: oil, paint, water, but in the context of this house, they looked like ghosts. His light caught something on one of the shelves. It wasn't in a box. It was sitting by itself, tucked behind a can of paint. It was a small, leather-bound book. A diary. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He reached for it, his fingers closing around the cool leather. The cover was blank. He opened it. The first page was inscribed with a single name, in elegant, looping cursive: Sarah Jenkins. It was her diary. He felt a wave of dizziness, a mixture of elation and pure dread. This was it. This was what he had been looking for. Henderson hadn't just killed her. He had kept a trophy. A piece of her soul. He flipped through the pages. Sarah's handwriting was neat, precise. The entries were filled with her quiet observations, her frustrations with her students, her love for a particularly beautiful piece by Bach. And then, the entries began to change. About 3 months before she disappeared, a new character entered. Her private world, her new neighbor. June 12th, she wrote. The new neighbor seems nice enough. A police officer, David, he brought over a plate of cookies. Said he noticed I lived alone and wanted me to know there was a friendly face nearby. It felt a little forward, but I suppose it was a kind gesture. The entries grew more frequent and more unnerving. July 2nd, she wrote. David is always there. When I leave for work, he's jogging. When I come home, he's watering his lawn. It's probably a coincidence. This is a small street, but it feels less like a coincidence and more like a pattern. July 20th, she wrote. I found a dead bird on my porch this morning. Its neck was broken. I felt sick. David came over to see if I was all right. He said it was probably a cat. He put his arm around me. His touch felt cold. I told him I was fine, but I locked the door as soon as he left. I feel like I'm being watched. The words confirmed Leo's darkest fears. He was reading the real-time account of a woman being stalked. Terrorized. The friendly cop was a predator, slowly tightening his net. The injustice was no longer an abstract concept. It was here, in his hands, written in the victim's own blood and ink. He kept reading, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and grim purpose. He was getting closer to the end, closer to the truth of what happened in those last days. And then he found the final entry. It was dated August 15, 2005. The day before the Google car drove down Chestnut Lane. The words were shaky. Rushed he knows I know. I saw him looking through my window last night. I wasn't supposed to be home. I came back early from the orchestra rehearsal. He didn't see me see him. He thinks he's invisible. Tomorrow, I'm going to the police. Not here. I'm driving to the State Patrol office in Columbus. I can't trust the local police. He's one of them. I'm packing a bag to make it look like I'm leaving for good. I'm putting this diary in the Lining of my cello case. It's the only place he won't think to look. If something happens to me, this is the only proof I have. Leo's blood ran cold. The proof. It wasn't just the diary. It was the cello case. He scanned the basement, the beam of his flashlight bouncing off the stone walls. In the far corner, tucked under a dusty canvas tarp, was the unmistakable shape of a large instrument case. He stumbled towards it, his mind reeling. The cello case. She had hidden her story, her accusation, in the one thing she loved most. He ripped the tarp off. It was a black, hard-shell cello case, covered in a thick layer of dust. Scratched onto the side were the initials S.J. with trembling fingers. He fumbled with the latches. They were stiff, rusted. He finally got them open and lifted the lid. The case was empty. The velvet lining was a deep, rich red, the color of blood. There was no cello. Of course there wasn't. But there, in the bottom of the case, was a small, silver object. It was a key. A Honda key. Attached to it was a keychain. A small silver dream catcher. The truth hit Leo with the force of a physical impact. The car, the diary, the key. It was all here. Henderson hadn't just gotten rid of the body. He had gotten rid of the car. And he had kept these things: the diary, the key, the empty cases, trophies, mementos of his victory. He was a monster who relished his own evil. A sound from above made Leo freeze. A key turning in the front door lock. Henderson was home early. A wave of pure, undiluted terror washed over Leo. He was trapped in the basement of a murderer, with the evidence of his crime clutched in his hands. The sound of the front door opening was a gunshot in the silent house. Leo's entire world narrowed to the rectangle of light at the top of the basement stairs. He could hear Henderson's heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor above. The jingle of his keys as he tossed them into a ceramic bowl, a sound Leo had heard 100 times from his hiding place across the street, but which now sounded like a death knell. He was trapped. The word echoed in the cold, damp air, a silent scream. His escape route, the small window behind the azalea bush, felt 1,000,000 miles away. To get to it, he would have to cross the entire basement, in full view of the stairs. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. His breath hitched, his muscles locked. For a terrifying second, he was paralyzed, a mouse frozen in the gaze of a snake. Then, adrenaline, raw and potent, flooded his system. He couldn't freeze. He had to move. He had to hide. His eyes darted around the cluttered basement, the beam of his phone's flashlight shaking violently. The shelves, the boxes, the tarp. Nothing was big enough, deep enough. Footsteps creaked overhead, moving towards the kitchen. The refrigerator door opened and closed. Henderson was getting a drink, settling in. He was comfortable, he was safe in his lair. He had no idea the ghost of his crime was breathing the same stale air, just a few feet beneath him. Leo knew he had only seconds. He saw it then. A dark space beneath the wooden staircase, a triangular void filled with shadows and cobwebs. It wasn't a real hiding place. It was a child's hiding place, a pathetic, desperate gambit. But it was all he had. Clutching the diary and the key, he scrambled across the concrete floor, his sneakers making a soft, shuffling sound that seemed deafening in the silence. He squeezed himself into the narrow space, pulling his knees to his chest, trying to make himself as small as possible. He clicked off his phone's flashlight. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. It smelled of spiders and ancient dust. Held his breath, listening. The footsteps above started moving again. They were slow, deliberate. They crossed the living room. They were heading for the basement door. No, 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 Leo chanted in his head, his heart a wild drum against his ribs. Please, no, why would he come down here? It was just a random decision, a terrible, fatal coincidence. The doorknob rattled. The door swung open with a low, mournful squeak. Light flooded the top of the stairs. And then, a shadow fell across the light. Henderson was standing at the top of the steps, a dark silhouette against the warm glow of the house. Leo's blood turned to ice. He was going to die. Henderson would come down, see the open window, the disturbed dust, and he would know. He would hunt him down in the darkness, and Leo would become another one of his secrets. Another body buried in a place no one would ever find. But Henderson didn't move. He just stood there, his hand on the light switch. For a moment, Leo thought he had been seen, that the detective's preternatural senses had already detected him. But Henderson's posture was casual. He seemed to be thinking, debating something. Then, Leo heard a faint sound from upstairs. A cell phone ringing. Henderson muttered a curse under his breath. He took a step back from the doorway, his shadow retreating. Henderson, he answered, his voice a low grumble. There was a pause. Yeah, what is it? I just got home. Another pause, longer this time. Leo could hear the faint, tinny squawk of the person on the other end of the line. Are you serious? Henderson's voice had changed. It was sharp, alert. All trace of weariness was gone. Where? When? He was listening intently now, his body rigid. No, don't touch anything. I'm on my way, seal it off, I'll be there. In 10, the footsteps receded, moving quickly towards the front door. The door opened and slammed shut. A car engine roared to life. Tires squealed on the asphalt as the Ford Taurus sped away. Silence. Leo stayed huddled in his hiding spot for what felt like an eternity, his body trembling uncontrollably. He was soaked in cold sweat, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had been saved by a phone call. A random, miraculous phone call. He finally dared to crawl out from under the stairs, his limbs stiff and shaking. He fumbled for his phone, his thumb swiping uselessly at the screen before he managed to turn the flashlight back on. The beam illuminated the basement, the empty cello case, the open diary in his other hand. It was real. He hadn't imagined it. He scrambled back to the window, his mind racing. What was the call about? Seal it off. Don't touch anything. It was a crime scene. A new crime scene. What could possibly have called a detective out so urgently in the middle of the night? He clambered out the window, scraping his back on the frame, and ran. He didn't stop running until he was blocks away, his lungs burning, the diary and the key clutched to his chest like a holy relic. He found a secluded spot in a small park and collapsed onto a bench, gasping for air. He knew he couldn't go home, not with this. This changed everything. This was the plot twist. This was the hidden clue made manifest. He had the victim's own words, her final testament. He had the key to the car that was the central lie of the entire investigation. This wasn't just a theory based on a grainy photograph anymore. This was proof, hard, tangible proof. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about personal justice for Sarah. This was about exposing a monster with a badge. A man who had perverted his power, who had used his authority to kill and to cover it up. The conspiracy wasn't just Henderson's secret anymore. It was a stain on the entire police department that had promoted him, celebrated him, and allowed him to fester in their midst. Leo opened the diary again, his phone's light illuminating. Sarah's desperate, final words. If something happens to me, this is the only proof I have. She had been speaking to him, to the future, to anyone who might find her message in a bottle. She had trusted that the truth, somehow, would find a way. But what was he supposed to do with it? If he walked into a police station, what were the chances he'd be turning the evidence over to one of Henderson's friends? A friend who would make it disappear, and make Leo disappear along with it. He was a 15-year-old kid who had just committed breaking and entering. His story was wild, unbelievable. It was his word against a decorated detective he needed. A bigger stage. He needed to detonate this secret in a way that no one could cover up. He needed to turn Henderson's carefully constructed life into a public spectacle. The rage he felt was cold and clear now, burning away the last of his fear. It was the rage of the powerless, the righteous fury of a witness who could no longer stay silent. A new idea began to form in his mind, audacious and terrifying. It was inspired by Sarah's final entry. I'm driving to the State Patrol office. In Columbus, I can't trust the local police. She had understood that the corruption might be localized. She had been trying to find an outside authority. Leo pulled out his phone and did a search. Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. The BCI was the state's top law enforcement agency, an independent body that investigated complex crimes and, crucially, police misconduct. They were the cavalry. But he couldn't just call them, he needed to create an event. A moment so public and so shocking that it would force their hand, that it would bypass any internal politics or loyalties. He needed to create a trap. He thought about the phone call Henderson had received. A crime scene. It had to be something big to pull him away so suddenly. A homicide, most likely. Henderson, the seasoned detective, would be in his element, taking control, directing the uniformed officers, his authority absolute. He would be surrounded by his colleagues, wrapped in the protective embrace of the blue wall of silence. He would feel untouchable. And that's when Leo would strike. His plan was insane, a high-wire act with no safety net. But it was the only way. He would use Henderson's own power, his own arrogance, against him. He would turn the detective's crime scene into a stage for his own public unmasking. He found the BCI's anonymous tip line. He also found the email address for the top investigative reporter at the Columbus Dispatch, the biggest newspaper in the state. He began to compose a message. He would be the hidden source, the digital ghost, pulling the strings. 2. Reporters. Email, BCI tipline subject. The truth about the Sarah Jenkins cold case. My name is not important. I am a witness. For 17 years, a murderer has been hiding in plain sight, wearing the uniform of the Westerville Police Department. His name is Detective David Henderson. He murdered his neighbor, Sarah Jenkins, in August of 2005. The official story of her disappearance is a lie he created. He attached the digital files, the screenshot of Sarah's green Honda parked on the street, the image of Henderson watching it, the final, terrifying close-up of Henderson's enraged face as he attacked the Google car. This is the photographic proof. But I have more. I have Sarah Jenkins's private diary, taken from Henderson's house tonight. I have the key to her car, a car he reported as missing. He has kept these as trophies of his crime for 17 years. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was the point of no return. Detective Henderson is currently at a homicide scene somewhere in your city. I don't know the location, but you can find him. I am going to confront him there. I am going to give him the chance to confess. I want you to be there to see it. I want the whole world to see it. He added a final, chilling line. Bring cameras. The truth is about to be made public, and it's going to be explosive. He took a deep breath and hit send. The message flew out into the digital ether, a declaration of war. He had just lit the fuse. Now all he had to do was walk into the heart of the explosion and pray he didn't get vaporized. He stood up, the diary and the key feeling heavy in his pocket, a tangible link to the past and a weapon for the future. He started walking, his destination no longer a secret hiding place, but the center of the storm. He would find crime scene, and he would give Sarah Jenkins the justice she had been denied for so long. Finding the crime scene was easier than Leo expected. He didn't need a map. He just had to follow the lights. From a few blocks away, he could see the strobing, kaleidoscopic pulses of red and blue, painting the dark, sleeping houses in flashes of emergency. The lights were a beacon, drawing him in. As he got closer, he could see the yellow tape, a perimeter, cordoning off a neat, two-story colonial at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The air buzzed, not with cicadas, but with the crackle of police radios and the low murmur of hushed official voices. This was Henderson's world, a world of violence and procedure, of which he was the undisputed king. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, wild thing. The fear was back, cold and primal. He was a child about to walk into a lion's den. But beneath the fear was a layer of something else, a cold, hard resolve. He clutched the diary in his jacket pocket, its leather cover a talisman against the terror. He was here for Sarah. He slipped through the shadows of the neighboring yards. Staying outside the orbit of the uniformed officers who guarded the perimeter, he saw him almost immediately. Henderson was standing in the middle of the street, under the harsh glare of a portable floodlight. He was in his element, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. He pointed, he gave orders, his voice sharp and authoritative. He was wearing black latex gloves. He looked powerful, in control, untouchable. This was the man who had smiled at Leo's mother while Sarah's body was decomposing in the trunk of her own car. The sight of him, so confident and self-assured, filled Leo with a white-hot rage that burned away the last of his fear. He saw them next. A man in a trench coat and a woman with a notepad, standing just outside the tape, talking to a uniformed officer, the press. The Columbus Dispatch reporter had come, and behind them, a news van from a local TV station was quietly pulling up. Its camera operator already hoisting a large broadcast camera onto his shoulder. The fuse had been lit, and the spark was traveling. It was time. Leo took a deep breath, the air tasting metallic and cold. He stepped out of the shadows and began to walk towards the yellow tape. He didn't run. He walked with a steady, deliberate pace, his eyes locked on Henderson. He felt 100 eyes turn towards him as he approached the perimeter. A young officer, his face barely older than Leo's, stepped forward to intercept him. "Whoa. Son, you can't be here. This is a restricted area." Leo didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed on the man in the center of the street. "I need to speak to Detective Henderson," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "The detective is busy. You need to leave." "Tell him it's about Sarah Jenkins," Leo said, his voice ringing out in the charged silence. The name dropped into the scene like a stone into a still pond. The murmuring stopped. The radios seemed to fall silent. Every head turned. He saw the reporter's head snap up, her eyes wide. The TV camera swiveled in his direction, and then he saw Henderson. The detective froze, his hand still pointing at a piece of evidence on the ground. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing as he saw Leo. For a split second, Leo saw a flicker of confusion in his face, and then, as their eyes met, he saw something else, recognition. Not of Leo as the boy from down the street, but a deeper, more primal recognition. The recognition of a predator that has just caught the scent of a trap. Henderson started walking towards him, his movements stiff, controlled. The confident swagger was gone. He arrived at the tape, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at Leo, then at the young officer. "It's all right, Mike. I'll handle this." He turned his gaze back to Leo, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You have 5 seconds to tell me who you are and what you think you're doing." Leo's heart was a trip hammer, but he held the detective's gaze. "My name is Leo. I used to live on Chestnut Lane." He saw a muscle twitch in Henderson's jaw. "I know what you did, detective. I know you killed her." A collective gasp went through the small crowd of officers. The reporter was scribbling furiously in her notepad. The red light on the TV camera was on. It was happening. It was real. Henderson let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was a brittle, ugly sound. "Kid, you're delusional. You're interrupting a homicide investigation. You need to go home before you get yourself in serious trouble." "I don't think so," Leo said. He reached into his pocket. A dozen hands on the other side of the tape went to their holsters. "It's not a weapon," he said calmly. He pulled out the small, leather-bound book. "I think this belongs to you. I found it in your basement." Along with this, he held up his other hand, and in the harsh glare of the floodlights, the Honda key, on its Dreamcatcher keychain, glinted. A tiny silver star of truth. The effect on Henderson was instantaneous and devastating. The mask shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy gray pallor. His eyes, wide with panic, darted from the diary to the key, then back to Leo's face. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The ghost of Sarah Jenkins, returned from the grave to accuse him. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "From your secret collection," Leo said, his own voice growing stronger. fueled by the detective's terror. "You kept them, didn't you? Trophies. To remember what you did, how you stalked her, how you terrorized her, how you killed her when she finally decided to go to the police. It's all in here." He held up the diary. "It's all in her own words." He opened the diary to the last page and began to read, his voice clear and ringing in the night air. "He knows I know. I saw him looking through my window last night. Tomorrow, I'm going to the police. If something happens to me, this is the only proof I have." As he read, he saw the reporter from the Dispatch speaking urgently into her phone. He saw two men in dark suits get out of an unmarked car that had just pulled up. They wore jackets with the letters BCI embroidered on the back. The cavalry had arrived. Henderson was imploding. His carefully constructed world was collapsing around him, in real time, on live television. The authority, power, the respect, it was all evaporating under the heat of a 17-year-old truth. He looked around wildly, at the faces of his colleagues, at the unblinking eye of the camera, at the BCI agents now walking purposefully towards him. He was trapped. The hunter was now the prey. He lunged. It was a desperate, primal act. He didn't lunge for Leo, he lunged for the diary. He vaulted over the yellow tape, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage, the same face Leo had seen in the final dying frame of the Google car camera, but he never reached him. The two BCI agents moved with swift, brutal efficiency. They intercepted him mid-air, tackling him to the ground. Henderson roared, a sound of pure animal fury, thrashing and kicking on the asphalt. One of his black latex gloves tore, revealing the pale, trembling flesh beneath. "David Henderson," one of the agents, said, his voice calm and cold as he wrenched the detective's arm behind his back. "You are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Jenkins." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound Leo had ever heard. It was the sound of a secret dying. It was the sound of a lock turning. It was the sound of justice. Henderson went limp, all the fight gone out of him. He lay on the cold pavement, his face pressed against the asphalt. A decorated detective brought down by a 15-year-old boy and the ghost of a woman who refused to be silenced. Leo stood there, the diary still open in his hand, the key dangling from his fingers, watching as they hauled the monster to his feet. As they pushed him towards a squad car, Henderson looked up, and for one last terrifying moment, his eyes met Leo's. They were filled, not with rage, but with a hollow, bottomless despair. It was the look of a man whose world had been utterly and completely destroyed. And in that moment, Leo didn't feel triumph. He just felt an immense, soul-crushing sadness for the quiet music that had been silenced so long ago. The cinematic payoff wasn't a moment of celebration. It was a moment of profound, heartbreaking catharsis. The secret was out, but the cost was etched on every face, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights. The explosion had a half-life. In the days that followed Henderson's spectacular arrest, the story was everywhere. It was a media firestorm, a perfect, horrifying storm of sex, secrets, and a killer cop. The image of Henderson's enraged, lunging face from the Google Street View camera was on every news channel, every website, a viral meme of suburban evil. The TV footage of his breakdown at the crime scene played on a continuous loop. The headlines screamed, "The Google Ghost, the killer cop of Chestnut Lane, the boy who solved a murder." Leo became a reluctant celebrity. He was the kid, a real-life boy detective. The media camped outside his house, reporters shouting questions, offering money for interviews. His parents, initially shocked and terrified, were now fiercely protective, forming a human shield around him. He gave one statement, carefully prepared with the BCI and a lawyer they had provided. He told the simple, unvarnished truth, his voice quiet but steady. He talked about the Street View image, about finding the diary, about Sarah. He dedicated his discovery to her memory. Then, he retreated into the silence of his home, the blinds drawn, just as they had been when his journey began. The diary was the key that unlocked everything. With the information from Sarah's last entry, and Henderson's DNA now on file, the BCI located the cello case in his basement. Forensic analysis of the soil and dust in the case matched rare pollen found only in a specific marshy area of a state park 50 miles away. It was a place Henderson was known to frequent for hiking. After a two-day search, they found her. Sarah Jenkins was buried in a shallow grave, her cello, her beloved instrument, buried with her. Henderson had not just stolen her life, he had tried to bury her music forever. The city was rocked by the scandal. The police chief resigned. An internal affairs investigation was launched, a purge of the old guard who had been friends with Henderson, who had ignored the warning signs, who had, perhaps, in their darkest hearts, suspected but stayed silent. The blue wall had crumbled, brought down by a digital ghost and a dead woman's words. The trial was a formality. Faced with the diary, the key, the forensic evidence, and the damning Google images, Henderson's police union lawyer had no defense. Henderson sat in the courtroom, a hollowed-out man in an ill-fitting suit. He had aged 20 years in a few weeks. The confident predator was gone, replaced by a grey, shuffling old man. He never looked at the gallery, he just stared at his hands. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in its cold procedural way, had been served. For Leo, the aftermath was a quiet, haunted landscape. The world saw him as a hero, but he didn't feel like one. He felt like a survivor of a war he hadn't known he was fighting. He was plagued by nightmares. He would see Henderson's face, twisted in rage, lunging at him in the dark. He would hear the mournful, distant sound of a cello, a song he could never quite identify. He had brought the truth to light, but the truth was a heavy, ugly thing. It had cost him his innocence, his sense of safety, his simple, uncomplicated view of the world. A month after the sentencing, a small package arrived for him in the mail. There was no return address. Inside, he found a simple, handwritten card. "Thank you," it said. "You gave me back my voice." It was signed, Maria Flores. Tucked inside the card was a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman with dark, sad eyes and feathered bangs, holding a cello and smiling, not at the camera, but at something just beyond it, something that made her happy. It was a photo of Sarah he had never seen before. It was a picture of her when her music was still alive. Leo realized that the healing wasn't in the verdict or the headlines. It was in these small, quiet moments. It was in knowing that Maria Flores could sleep at night. It was in knowing that Sarah's family, a brother he had never met who flew in from California for the trial, finally had answers. The healing was in the restoration of a small piece of truth in a world full of lies. One crisp autumn afternoon, he took the bus back to Chestnut Lane. He didn't go to Henderson's house, which now sat empty, a for sale by bank sign staked. In its perfect lawn, he went to Sarah's house, the one that was now painted a cheerful yellow. He saw the new family in the yard. The father was pushing his young daughter on the swing set. The girl's laughter pealed through the quiet air. It was a happy sound, a sound of life. He walked to the corner of the street and looked back. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows, just as it had in the Google Street View image. He thought about that image, that digital ghost of a summer afternoon. It was a time capsule of a terrible secret, a moment when good and evil coexisted in the sun-drenched silence, unseen and unrecorded, until a curious boy decided to take a walk down a forgotten digital street. He thought of Sarah's yearbook. Quote, "I am a part of all that I have met." He finally understood it. He had met Sarah Jenkins, and she was now a part of him. He had met David Henderson, and the monster, too, was a part of him, a dark shadow he would carry forever. He was a part of their story, and they were a part of his. The cost of the truth had been immense, but the cost of silence would have been unbearable. He turned and walked away from Chestnut Lane, the sound of the child's laughter, a fragile, hopeful melody against the lingering, haunting silence of the cello. The echo remained, a bittersweet reminder of the music that was lost, and the small, quiet truth that had finally against all odds, been found.